So welcome everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Bill Bitner. I've been around for a while, and you haven't gotten rid of me yet. We've done a session like this for maybe 5 times now or so, and we keep doing it. People seem to like it. I think it's important that we share our stories, we share a little bit of the background. I like these because I always learn something new about people that I think I've known for decades, and something new pops up. So we'll see how that goes today.
Yeah, but I'm nervous because one of the people you interviewed was Jones.
Was he sitting next to him?
No, he was in that spot.
Well, you know,
Doomed.
some people got here really early to make sure they got the proper seat.
That's right.
I'll have some questions for the folks here. At some point, I'll open it up to the room to ask questions. I reserve the right not to call on certain people, or at least not call twice. Then we'll do a little lightning round, and then we'll wrap some things up. So first off, AI is the rage, so I wanted to figure out how I could leverage that. So I asked some AI to give me intros for these guys.
Oh, God.
So I'll give you time to rebuttal. So Rick Troth, according to the AI, Rick Troth is a longtime ZVM expert and contributor, known for being deeply engaged with the community, especially around scripting, open source, and practical problem solving on VM. Which
Guy sounds wonderful.
It does. I should have got him.
Can we invite him to the workshop?
If you don't say so yourself.
You need a new resume?
Richard F. Lewis, to distinguish him from all the other Richard Lewis, is well known in the ZVM community. He's been a public voice for the platform, a prolific writer of technical content, and a longtime IB representative for ZVM, which I think that matches too.
Works.
And Rick Barlow brings a wealth of experience from a major ZVM customer environment, and now from the performance and analytics side for Velocity Software. He has the rare blend of operations, systems performance, and real-wide customer context.
Yeah.
So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, correct anything you felt wrong there. Maybe just give us a little bit about where or when you first came to VM, and we'll come back and dive into that a little bit deeper later on. So we'll start with Richard.
Okay.
Rick.
Make up your mind. Which one? My name's Rick Troth, and
No, this is mine.
well, I wanted to see what it said because I thought it was great.
Rick Troth right here, long time.
I first met VM at a Dutch company with offices in New Orleans, Shell. They were running VMSP, and it talked to all kinds of crazy systems like burrows and whatnot. And this guy was teaching me about it, and there was this IPL command. I said, what the heck does that mean? He said, that's initial program load. I mean, you mean like boot? He said, yeah. I said, so I could bring up any System 370 operating system on top of this. He said, yeah. Wow. So I was impressed, and I went back to my university where I was still a student, and I said, we got to get this. And a couple of years later, we did get it. And so we had VM all over the place.
Nice.
And that was a long time ago. I don't really want to admit how long.
We'll get to that
But
later.
somebody was asking, yeah, more than 40 years.
Nice. And Richard Lewis?
Yeah, so before I came to work for IBM, I was working for Electronic Data Systems, the company owned by Ross Perot, if you're that old and can remember. And I was working in the DC area in a data center that EDS owned. I'd been an application programmer and then a system software programmer. At the time, I was a system programmer working on MVT to MVS transitions that were happening in EDS. Then EDS was sold to General Motors, and I decided I didn't want to move to Detroit. So a colleague of mine had gone up the road to Gaithersburg to an open house at IBM and said, hey, IBM's hiring, why don't you come up here? So I went there, interviewed, got a job to be a MVS system programmer. My first day, I showed up. The hiring manager met me at the door and said, we've made a switch. Instead of the MVS system programming group, we're going to put you in the VM system programming group. It's like, what?
What's that? What the heck is that stuff?
Well, fortunately, I had a glimpse of ZVM because before I left, EDS
Called the right thing. It wasn't Z then.
yeah, that's true. VM. EDS was bidding on a contract with the Army that was a VM contract, actually, and they'd hired two hotshots to help them win this contract named Peter and Carol Jobish. So I was sitting in room with Peter and Carol Jobish as they were going through runs to try to get performance good, and was fascinated because Peter Jobish was just making changes to CP on the fly, and then another run would go. So I had a glimpse of ZVM, but I never thought I'd be working with ZVM. So from that day forward at IBM, I've been working with VM.
Well, I started out doing
What's your name?
Rick. Okay, if you don't get the joke, it's Rick, Richard, and Rick. So it's Bill couldn't find anybody with a unique name. So anyway, I started out as an application programmer. For all of 2.5 years, I wrote an enormous assembler language program for the insurance company I was working at. And as far as I know, it ran for about 15 years before somebody decided it was too hard to maintain and did something else to replace it. But anyway, but I got bored with applications pretty fast. I also did a bunch of COBOL programming, and so I wanted to get into the system programming group. They said no, and I almost left the company, and then they decided to implement a program that allowed non-IT people to use the computer. It was an add-on. It ran on top of MVS called VSPC, and we let actuarials get their hands on keyboards, APL keyboards. We were talking about APL a little earlier, because actuaries work with a lot of tables, and APL is really great at processing arrays, so that was great. Anyway, that lasted about a year, and they needed something that was more powerful to allow more non-IT people. So IBM took us over to their building here in downtown Columbus, and we looked at VM on a 4331. And the next, about 6 months from then, I installed it at the company I was working at. And so from about 1980, it's either late 80 or early 81, I can never remember exactly, but started doing VM. I also have a really strong interest in hardware. And as we all know, all of us who are VM people know, VM is a great emulator of the real hardware. So talk about a great pairing of those two things. I've had my hands on more machines than most people do in their entire careers outside of IBM. Now, IBMers often get to see them. Most non-IBMers never get to even see their computers, much less have hands-on, take parts out and put them back in. So that's been my joy. When they bring the plexiglass machines along, well, it used to be the live ones. Richard could tell stories about the live ones, but it's always been a thrill. Anytime you go and talk to people around that machine, there's always a buzz, because when you see it, it's even more amazing than when you just have hands-on behind the scenes. So
Cool, thank you. So Rick Troth, you talked about kind of your aha moment might have been when the IPL to boot kind of thing went through. Richard and Rick Barlow, were there aha moments for you where you're like, this VM thing is something that's cool or different or special? Or you just wanted a job?
I'll go first.
There's no wrong answers here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my moment like that was one of the first things we did with VM after we had it installed and running at the site was run VM on top of VM. And then we turned around and started running MVS on top of VM. And boy, were those MVS guys happy that we could do something with it, and they didn't have to come in on every weekend and, try something new. And that was, to me, that was amazing to be able to give us all a break so we could do the jobs we had to do any time of the day instead of, off hours. I thought that was pretty amazing.
Cool.
Aha moment. I guess probably
It was just love at first sight.
no. Well, the first week I was trying to find ISBF, but that didn't work out. So, Xedit, I was having some real trouble with Xedit. The other piece was, where's the master catalog? So those were tough days, but I was working in the Federal Systems Division of IBM, and that was back when IBM had large VM systems to support internal, just about everything. And it turned out that the VM systems were the personal computers of those days, prior to the PC ever showing up. We had VM systems with 20,000 registered users on them, and everybody had their CMS virtual machine, and we were trying to stuff all those into less memory than you can possibly imagine, and still have good performance. And then we switched from the fast internal network that we had to the production RSCS, which wasn't anywhere near as good at the time. And email never got through to our senior vice president, and he actually flew to Washington for a meeting that was canceled. And so
I bet that went over well.
the heads really rolled on that one. So those were some aha moments.
Nice. Oops.
Yeah, oops is right.
So, you guys shared kind of where you started in the beginning. What are you doing now, other than up here in this lovely panel? We'll start with you, Rick Troth.
I knew it was dangerous being close to you. I've had so much fun with VM. I remember in '98 we had VMware, and wow, virtual machines on another architecture besides System 370, 390. And I look at some of the other virtualization offerings, and I'm like, they're almost good enough. To reuse a phrase we were using recently, and it's a little frustrating to see the industry not using the best that they've got. I took a job at a certain company. I won't say which one, but it's the same one he used to work at, and we were doing virtualization, and there had actually been a bake-off between the different architectures before I got there, and Z won. And so we did Z virtualization to host Linux, and that company's web servers were running on top of Linux, on top of ZVM on a Z10 at the time, and rock solid. And it was really amazing. And then later on they decided, well, I don't know, we got a different director, and I don't like this IBM stuff, and so he shifted it over. And I don't know how things have gone since then. I left.
Right. So kind of, I guess where I was going was. What are you doing today? Are you with a vendor? Are you with IBM? If you're allowed to say. You're not a spy, are you?
Well, I was born... No.
It's secret.
I work for VSSI now,
Okay.
and we are the VPARS and VTAPE people. And VFile people, yes. We have a new product. Is that coming out? Speaking of RSCS... But I am delighted to be back doing. I had a time with a different technology. I took a job not doing VM work for about 7 years, and that was good for me personally because I learned a whole lot about encryption and data security and stuff like that. I have a CISSP, thank you very much, but I wasn't doing any VM work, and I am so glad to be on VM again. Actually, not just babysitting systems, but doing real development. It's fun, and the things that VM can do, no platform can do. So that's exciting. Cool. I'm happy.
And Richard, where are you today?
I'm with IBM, Washington Systems Center, supporting ZVM.
Virtual Washington Systems Center.
There's fewer and fewer of us in the Systems Center supporting ZVM. Chuck is an alumni.
Yes.
But, there's fewer there. So I've been at the Washington Systems Center a long time. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Mr. Barlow?
I now work I retired from my original company after 41 years, and now I work for the premier performance monitoring system for VM. I work for Velocity Software now, but I still do just about the same thing. Do some application development, so the products we sell, but I also maintain all the infrastructure, hardware and VM software.
Do you still have, when we were at that other company, you showed me an assembler program. I think it was a calendar printer.
I have it.
I want a copy.
Now everybody's going to want one.
Okay, I'll tell you, this is a great story because I have 5 kids, and some of them are way smarter than I am. But I have described to them what it was like when computers started out. But by the time I was a part of using mainframes, IBM had done the 360 and had a stable code platform, and I described to them, I wrote this assembler program the first year I worked at the company, so in 1978. I still have that assembler program, and it runs today. So it's kind of it's a trivial program. It generates calendar pages, and there are a lot of better tools, but I like it because it's something that I wrote clear back there and in assembler, and it works just as well today as it did then. So, and I think that's a great illustration of one of the main strengths of our IBM Z platforms.
That's important. So what else comes to mind when we talk about what differentiates ZVM and or the mainframe from other platforms that you think people miss? Any one of you? Or all 3 of you? One at a time.
I'd be stealing his thunder if I said it's cooler, because back when I started with his company that he keeps not naming, we were promoting the fact that in the data center you walk behind a rack of blade servers and it's hot. You just feel the heat. Of course, it's freezing cold everywhere else, so that's kind of a nice thing.
Right.
But if you walked behind the mainframe, it was cool. So VM is cool.
It is cool.
It is cool.
If you look at the hardware, I like to talk about the hardware, and if anybody will listen to me, I can bore them to death with it really fast. But if you look at the statistics on the little chart that he's got down there by the machine, 43 billion transistors on that little chip, and 23 miles of wire, pseudo wire. It's not really a wire in there anymore. But and I've looked at those generations. I've worked through whatever there are, 20 generations of CMOS machines, and the bipolar before them. If you look at the last non-CMOS machine, it took a board this big, about 18 inches square, with 9 3-inch chips on it, and that was one, what we would call a core today. And now there's 8 of them on a chip that size with, I don't remember how much memory. I don't remember that statistic, but you look at that evolution, and then what we can do with it, the virtualization of it. Why we're all here, VM. To think that I can run an MVS workload next to a VM workload, next to a Linux workload, next to a CMS workload, and I don't care what anybody says if they're in the room.
And TPF and VSE.
And TPF and VSE, but CMS is a really good place to work, and you can do great programs on there, and it runs really fast.
And the isolation is profound.
Exactly.
Again, going back to the 7 years I was doing security stuff, there's nothing as secure as the barrier that VM sets up between virtual machines. It's incredible.
It's all virtual.
Virtual.
We all live in a virtual machine.
I have a question.
Yellow virtual machine.
It's like
If you were to look at the largest mainframe back in 1978, you might be able to fit 4 of them in this room.
That's about right.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
And they would
3090, 600.
so,
No.
so small, power-wise, relative to that. What are you calling it? The plexiglass?
Yeah.
Plexiglass out there?
9021-9X2. That great big H.
Yeah, the big 168 or whatever it was at the time.
And it was 80s.
With channels.
Yeah.
Maybe
But
4.
it was huge.
This could run circles around those
Yeah.
era of computers, right?
The first mainframe I worked on was a 370-168 AP, if anybody even knows what an AP is. And it had the equivalent of now nobody uses MIPS anymore, but at that time they were measured in MIPS, 1.4 MIPS for that thing. And the uni on, I don't remember what the 17 is, the 16 is 2,300 something. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500. I was just looking at those stats last week, but think of that in 45 years, 1.4 to 2,500. And that was 2 engines, and now we can have up to 240, I think.
208.
208, sorry.
On the
On a 17. It's just what we can do in that very small footprint. It can replace a room of racks this size would easily run on one Z machine today.
And the memory.
What's that?
The memory.
Oh yeah.
Kilobytes for terabytes.
Power and cooling. 10 years ago, it was 4-to-1 in terms of heat dissipation compared to a Z, and likewise, computing-wise, 4 times as much computing could sit in a Z as in a set of racks, and that's grown more. I haven't done that analysis now in more than 10 years, but.
So Richard Lewis, is there anything else that comes to mind in terms of a differentiator for either ZVM or the mainframe platform?
I mean, the one, it's already been mentioned, that sticks out is compatibility. I think that's the greatest strength. Since 360, I still run some very old levels of Linux on the current level of ZVM, on Z15s and 16s. I haven't tried 17s. And while they don't support new features, they still run.
Well, I'm going to
The same is true for application programs. Rick has already testified to it. I think that's one of the biggest strengths.
Yeah. So one of the lightning round questions that I was going to use, but I'll use it now, is what's the oldest VM file that you still have?
Oh gosh.
Of your own, so it can't be like.
Oh.
So is it your
I'm pretty sure I
assembler?
have a 1982 file.
Okay.
Well, the assembler one I updated a little bit because I actually made an
actually.
enhancement to it. But I'm pretty sure I still have some files dated 1982.
Well, you had that program that you wrote in your first year, right?
Yes, but I've enhanced it so I don't know what the original date
Yeah,
was.
new versions don't count.
Yeah.
But some terms were in that year, so it's really the oldest.
Well, I suppose you could say that. I might have an archival copy that's from the first year.
Yeah.
Oh, stop it.
What are you saying? I have it?
No,
Checked. Thank you, James.
I think he's talking about his own files.
No, he's probably looking at my disk.
He thinks this-
Oh, James is looking at yours.
You should be thinking about your answers.
Probably 92.
92? Okay.
Yeah, I know I've got some from 80 still.
80 still.
1980.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about probably changes over the years in terms of learning this stuff. Like, and you all sort of came from different backgrounds with this. Tell me a little bit about your learning experience back more than 1 decade ago, and more recently, how has that education kind of gone? Whoever wants to start first is fine.
You go first. Then he names us.
Well, it was pretty much self-learning for VM. But being within IBM made that a lot easier because I had access to a lot more. But there were some very skilled people in the VM department that I got into, and so that helped quite a bit. But it was really just finding anything I could read and talking to people that were much more knowledgeable than I was, and then just doing the work. The more I did, the more I understood as I went along.
When we went through school, I suspect you guys had a similar experience. We learned a lot more about the building blocks that make computers work, and we learned about what it took in terms of memory and CPU to be able to build an application that was highly efficient and run well. And based on our experience today trying to find people who can help in our companies, I work for a company that's in need of people. They don't come out of school knowing any of those basics that it takes. Richard and I worked together with Cher to build a new to Z presentation. How long ago was that now? I don't know. Quite a few years. It blurs together. But when we looked at that and we tried to figure out, okay, so how do we explain to people what's unique about IBM Z compared to the other platforms that they may be familiar with, and that was a real eye-opener, really, to try and look at that.
Well, I also found even, when I worked with MVT and MVS, I never had the occasion to try to look, much deeper into the hardware. You obviously had to know something about the hardware. But I know when I started working with VM, what helped me a lot was learning much more about the hardware, simply because, the control program works with the hardware to understand how it's working. If I knew how the hardware worked, it helped me understand CP better. And since CP is producing, instantiating a virtual machine, that helped as well once I understood the hardware better. So I spent a lot more time trying to understand the hardware in depth, and that helped me with VM quite a bit.
Do you feel kind of along that line that with VM, the breadth of what you had to know was larger?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, though, another sort of aha moment was when I realized that I wasn't using very precise terminology, which was very confusing to other people in the sense of saying, well, ZVM does this, ZVM does that. I realized ZVM is a product. It's not an operating system. It's a product that consists of at least 3 operating systems, I guess if you take CST for ACF 4, but it's multiple operating systems. So you don't think of, we refer to ZOS as an operating system, which it is, but ZVM is a product. Right. And so I started intentionally, if I wanted to say something about CP, I said CP or CMS, because that helps. There are different command sets, so if you're new to VM, you're sort of trying to learn all the commands. Well, there's a certain set that applies to CP, and it's a finite set. So if you understand what the control program's doing, and then if you need to do something with the control program, you know the command set to look at. CMS is a whole different set of commands because it's a different operating system. It has a different purpose. So understanding that and becoming more precise, I think, helped a lot as well and helped me explain things better to people.
Cool. Rick Troth?
Education and learning. This workshop is one manifestation of the VM community, and I am so blessed. The time that I was away from VM, I missed friends, and I've learned so much from friends, and I've been supported by friends. In fact, I am in Ohio because of that guy in the back of the room and this guy here. They were already working at this place, and they helped me get the job. There's been so much of that, and we do foster, networking at events like this. But the VM community itself has been wonderful. And right before this, we were talking about BitNet, which I have a question about that in a minute. But the BitNet community back in the days when I was in academia, I'm holding off. It was just incredible to have that community and learn from people. There's a guy sitting right there between my wife Susan and my teammate Paul. I learned a particular coding style from Artie that I still use today. And thank you, sir.
Let the record stand that he was pointing to Artie.
Yeah. So it's learning from friends and stuff like that.
So, and I know this might be a difficult question, but I'm the one asking them, so it doesn't matter. Are there particular mentors or people that impacted your careers over the years? Now, I know it's a case where it may be too many, so you don't want to say, which that's fair too. But when I first said that, were there names or things that popped into your mind?
Melinda
Varian? Yep.
Certainly.
In fact, I think that her history, which is not the actual title, but that's what we all call it, I think it should be required reading for a lot of newbies.
Yeah, it's really good stuff.
Especially Dave Tuttle's memoirs. That was cloak and dagger.
Les Coleman.
That's a name, yeah.
He was quite something at the System Center.
Very bright, very
Wow, yeah.
dynamic.
He was brilliant.
Yeah.
If I'd go into his office to ask him a VM question, I'd get an answer to a VM question and a whole bunch of stuff about astronomy and some other things too. So,
Whatever it takes.
it was a bargain. I tried to leave remembering the VM stuff mostly, but yeah, he was a character.
Dave Jones.
Yeah.
Dave was not specifically a mentor to me, but man, he was so supportive. I mean, his Knights of VM title is spot on, Sir David DeGeneres.
Yeah. So Rick mentioned the community, and I'm going to take a little detour before I come back to your question. The community, VM brought a lot of things into the world that people don't even know. So before there were online chat places and stuff like that, there was a VM share. And it was done on old technology that evolved into what eventually became the internet. And so there's all this history behind it. But the community has been so strong in places for people to interact. I was trying to think of names of IBMers who no longer work there. I spent much of my career working problem determination on you name it. But it was not uncommon to pick up the telephone and call people in the IBM support center, support structure, or in the lab. People with names like, Jim Siciliano did I/O, and Glenn Script did networking, and John Marsh was part of the development team for pass-through and RSCS. David Bolliker, who had a team of CP developers for about, I don't know.
Well, it's really Bolliker and Korak.
Bolliker, Korak, and Miriam, and the fourth was the person who did all the Dawn, I think. Did all the, what's that?
John Roll was in that group as well.
Yeah. Anyway, these guys, single-hand, or the four of them put out some code when we implemented dynamic I/O and stuff. These guys would send me a CP module one day, and I'd load it up, test it the next, and find a problem. They'd send me another module. It was this looping process. But
It sounds like agile programming.
it was very agile. but the idea is, so here's a community of people, and you got these people that are supposed to be isolated in a lab, but they weren't. There was a lot of give and take and that's what made things, where the development was happening and the community was using it, and communities, some of us were enhancing it. I wasn't one of those, but I was, taking advantage of all those things coming and going.
No, that's a good point. And I don't have all the statistics, but before I left IBM, for a number of years, I tracked how many people in the VM development lab had interaction with customers. And I would bet any other lab that ours was as high as anybody else.
Yes, I think higher.
Yeah.
Much more so.
All right, so in a second, I'm going to open it up for questions from the field. So while you're thinking of questions, I asked ChatGPT what would be some good questions for each of the people here.
Have
So.
you been reading from that?
Let's see. This is a good one. Mr. Troth,
Oh, gosh.
ChatGPT would like to know, you're known for scripting, automation, and finding elegant solutions.
Of course.
What's your favorite small script, big impact story? Don't make me answer it for you.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else uses it, but I wrote an exec called new, because in a CMS context, you can have a shared mini disk, and I found myself just doing maintenance. I would put a new version of a file out on the shared mini disk, and I'd have to rename the old one and then copy the new one into place. But that meant there was a window, a race condition, where somebody might grab the disk and the file they want is not even there because I had renamed it. So I put together new exec, which would, as quickly as possible to minimize the window, he would rename the old file no updirt, no update the directory of the disk. And that was a neat trick. Somebody in IBM had put that in there. And then he would copy the new file into place. And I've used it a lot. I wrote one in Tickle, that's TCL, for Unix and Linux. And so I used it. But anyway, that was, it impacted me a lot. And it's short,
And
really short.
Nice.
Really short program.
Can you explain that again without using your hands?
No.
All right.
I do have a question for you.
That's not how it works. Richard Lewis, looking back, what's the biggest shift you've seen in how customers use or think about virtualization from when you started to now?
I guess Linux has been the biggest, because prior to that, everybody was using CMS virtual machines, which were virtualization, but nobody knew it, and they didn't really care. But once Linux came on the scene, that's where virtualization really came to the forefront, and that was the strength.
Cool. Good one.
VM was client server before everybody even heard of client server.
I remember Sun Microsystems advertising, they were all about little bitty computers on. So the network is the computer. That was their slogan. And I thought, they got it backwards. With VM, the computer is the network.
It was.
Mr. Barlow, are you ready?
I am. I don't know if I can answer it, though.
You've spent decades running, I'm not sure how it knew decades, but you've spent decades running ZVM in a production environment. What's something about life as a large-scale customer that people outside that world don't always get?
You could answer so many different ways. The computer owns you. Yeah, many years of 24/7 support. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Somewhat of the aspect of production's not just production's production.
It is. I mean,
And even
the business often depends on it, and VM has been a strong supporter of that. Business recovery, we haven't even talked at all about that. VM was the core of business recovery.
Yes.
And still is in a lot of places. And, now we do it with some really expensive scripting and lots of hardware disk replication. But for many years, we did it on top of VM.
right.
I remember
I
that.
mean, an aspect of that I remember, at least you all taught me, was even non-production is important.
Yeah, so there's no such thing as a test system. In a large enterprise, to the leadership there, it's all production. They're really, even though if it's a test environment, an a testing environment, those are all still production because they affect hundreds or thousands of people who are trying to do the business of running the business. And if our systems weren't doing what they were supposed to do, it was critical.
The only real test environment is the one that you have that's all you're running. You're not affecting anybody else.
And that you don't tell anyone about.
So I'm going to open it up to the audience now for questions. I'd ask that you would raise your hand. No.
You can't ask any questions.
I saw Paul's hand first.
My question is non-technical. I noticed that you're in hair order.
Oh, that's not that. You can retract that question.
Was that intentional?
To repeat the question,
I think you might be the least crazy. I don't know.
Jim.
In competition. Yeah.
So,
Me too.
at one point, you guys were talking about the great potential of the mainframe, and the one thing came to my mind immediately when you were talking about that, but nobody ever mentioned it. So I just want to throw it out to see how you guys respond to it. I mean, you're talking about how the capabilities it has, but the scalability factor was something that I was looking for someone to say something about it, but it didn't get touched on, specifically as far as how far you can go. And to that extent, what's the largest number of things running under VM that you've seen? And I know back in the day when you had profs, you had literally thousands of users, I think. I'm just curious to know what you've seen, experienced, in that regard.
I didn't do it, but people who work for the guy who claims to have done it are here at this conference. Counting number of Linux instances on top of one VM system. It was 41,000, I think, and I'll have to check with Margaret to know for sure what David said about that. I was later told that IBM did it internally and hit 97,000. Wow. I mean, and it's the kind of thing where you bring up Linux and you share a web page. Okay, so it wasn't anything spectacular, but that's still a pretty impressive number.
So,
yeah, absolutely, and that really just shows the potential that it has.
so real world in the application environment, Rick mentioned those web servers. Well, this company decided they were going to do a Super Bowl commercial.
Oh gosh.
And
was there.
so we scaled that system Linux-wise up to 20 times what they thought it could possibly do.
Yeah.
And so we did capacity on demand, dynamically added capacity,
Yeah.
took this environment and scaled it up to what they thought they might get. And the reality was nobody went off during the Super Bowl to look for insurance. so it was all a test for nothing. But the scalability is that's what you asked about. We could take the same workload, not change anything, and make the machine big enough to run what somebody thought it might need. So,
and I think that's a really powerful aspect of computers that people just don't know or aware about.
I think that idea of being able to juggle that much, and the other thing that often comes to mind too is in some of these shops, like juggling 7 balls is impressive. Juggling some ping pong balls, some tennis balls, some bowling balls, and a chainsaw all at once.
that must be the MBS.
Yeah, it's different. But good question.
Well, you also mentioned the number of real world workload on a machine.
Yes.
In the profs days, we had 25,000 customers.
I thought you were going to talk about that. Yeah.
Well, we had 25,000 customers defined and ran up to about 2,000 to 3,000 at one time.
Yeah.
In the Linux days, we ran some 1,200 virtual machines across 2 systems, and each one of those was typically running 3 to 4, call them business entities, whether it was a web service or an application service or a database or whatever. So like 4,000, the equivalent of 4,000 standalone PCs on 2 machines. So huge scale.
For the guy in the middle, the Rick in the middle, at IBM, you had a ton of people using it.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What you know, any idea what that
I mean, back in the profs days, we had systems with 20 to 25,000 users.
Logged on.
And yeah, so we had
that's just huge. And that
we
was-
had to
How long
have multiple CMS 190 disks because we had just
that
too
too.
much contention
Yeah.
on the 190.
And we're not
So
talking current day computers. This is how far back?
4381s.
We're talking, that's 80s.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, that's phenomenal.
That with early
Potential
30,
back then.
3090s. So old machines. CMS was good, Profs was good. It was a very efficient environment. And there were a lot of customers in the automotive industry who were running CAD CAM on ZVM
Right.
with CMS virtual machines. So
I remember display right now.
Ford had an
Ford
enormous.
Ford had
implement.
100,000
Yeah.
CMS or Profs users.
Yeah.
Not all logged on at once.
No, and it was
Still.
across multiple systems, but 100,000 registered users. And I remember when they finally abandoned that to go with Lotus Notes and distributed. I think they managed, if I remember right, they managed those systems with a ZVM staff of 5. And when they got rid of that, the number of people just to handle the Lotus Notes servers, it went through the roof.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I mean, talk about wasting a lot of money.
Good question. Scaling. Other questions? No?
So I remember working on a justification for half a meg of memory for 371 PA
Wow. Yeah.
AP, so that we could have 50 more users on the system. So this was late 70s, early 80s time frame. And so I think, 50 more CMS users with half a meg of memory.
Your phone can't handle that. Half a meg of memory on your phone wouldn't work.
Right.
So that was always something that was very, I think, very impressive with VM is that it was always very, very efficient
Right.
with the hardware. In fact, I understand that's one of the complaints that the hardware folks had with VM was that it didn't sell hardware. You had customers that was like, you're sitting on the old hardware, when are you going to upgrade?
The first mainframe that I was responsible for with VM ran 150 CMS users in 6 mega memory.
All right. Any other questions, or we'll go to the lightning round?
So somebody asked me before this session about BitNet. Was that? I mean, he came up to me and he said, "Was that named after Bill Bitner?" That's what he said. Okay, so I'll tell him no.
Oh, no. Okay, let's see. What's one word your friends would use to describe your job? Pretend you have friends.
Me?
Yeah, anybody. I was pointing
Fun.
at Mr. Troth, but he wants to think about it.
Yeah.
Mysterious.
Fun, I guess.
Fun?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Geeky.
Geeky. What's your all-time favorite IBM product name?
Product name.
I can't remember them.
Or component name.
Well, no, I can't say that
How about
because it's actually a
ADSM?
terrible name.
Write it down.
WDSF.
WDSM. I went to ADSM, but
Yeah,
that's
same
stored
name.
as-
Yeah, it's actually a horrible name, but the product was kind of cool.
ACF V10.
There you go. That was the second one that came to mind. An acronym of acronyms.
That was a trivia question on the Facebook IBM retiree list recently. Did anyone come up with a recursive acronym? So AVS was the one I used.
AVS is a good one, yeah.
All right. GUI or green screen?
What's a GUI?
Green screen all the
GUI
way.
is the green screen user interface.
Oh, I like
Green
that.
screen user interface.
Honestly, I like Amber better, but green screen is fine.
Okay.
I like full colors, but
Four colors? All right.
I'll take a 3270 over a GUI any day.
First computer you ever used?
Oh wow.
You mean personal?
TRS 80
Yeah,
Model
any
1.
computer.
Yeah, I
It was
think
an
it was a
HP
Commodore 64.
Commodore?
or something.
Oh, yeah, could go back to high school.
I used
HP
it.
2000.
HP2. Really?
Yeah.
An ASR 33 teletype?
Yep. I helped to install it. Believe it or not.
You guys ever hear of a microlaser?
Yeah.
I did hear
The name.
One of those together.
So, go with one more here. What's your favorite non-technical skill that helps you at work?
Wow.
Wow.
It's a tough one. I'm saving the tough ones for last.
Non-technical skill.
I'm looking at my wife for advice.
You at work, is
Yep.
that correct?
Yeah.
I think it's got to be the inability to network. I mean, I really think that's been a key all along.
Yeah, that is a.
What's that scripture verse? Blessed are the peacemakers. I mean, sometimes you just gotta. Not that I'm good at it, but I try.
Okay. So wrapping it up, what's some advice you would want to share now? So it could be advice to people starting out new. It could be advice to 21-year-old Rick, or just advice in general that you want to leave people with.
There was a song not too long ago called "Dear Younger Me." What would I tell myself if I started over? I don't think there's any better place to work than VM on mainframes. I think learn a lot about the hardware, learn a lot about the software. We never really touched on it, but VM people also have the great joy of being able to work across the entire software stack. So I think that's one of the reasons I love the VM space.
Yeah. Touches a lot of points.
Yeah, I'd say, if you're starting out in VM, then particularly if you're developing or something like that, broaden to understand the whole system, not just the piece you're working on. It'll make a lot more sense, and what you're working on will be a lot better.
Cool.
To a younger me, I would say embraced games. I've never been keen on games.
Okay.
But the first program, and I didn't run it, my teammate ran it. The first program that ran on mainframe Linux, basic mode, without VM, outside of IBM, was Doom.
Doom.
And I have since then learned that Doom is a fantastic sysadmin tool. I don't know how that works, but this is what I've been told. So I've come to
Get the
value
BFG.
games. No. We used a Sun workstation for the graphics. So that was...
All right, so when I get in trouble for playing Doom on my laptop at work, I can tell them it's actually a learning system administration.
Something like that, yeah. The things you learn at this workshop are invaluable when you go back to home.
Well, I want to thank my panelists up here. It isn't the easiest thing to be put on the spot because I didn't brief you guys with anything I was going to ask, let alone what ChatGPT is going to
I want to know how you fed it.
Well, that's a whole other story. That will cost you a beer.
Can I just say thank you?
Yes.
I mean, this is a highlight. I'm up in front with Bitner. This is amazing.
Who's calling you?
Spam.
Okay. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Hopefully we'll do this again next year, so I'll be looking around at people to bring up here. And everybody survived. So that's
Make sure he
so,
briefs you before you come out.
That's no fun in that. So please join me in thanking